Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is, of course, my pleasure to be able to rise in the House today, and I do want to welcome all of my colleagues from all sides of the House back. I know we've got important work to get to, and I'm looking forward to starting that important work with our discussion today on Bill C-21. Mr. Speaker, as the NDP's critic for small business, government-imposed red tape and the paper burden faced by Canada's entrepreneurs remains one of the primary concerns raised with me by business owners as I continue to consult with them on how government can create the conditions for them to grow their businesses and create jobs from coast to coast to coast. Whether it's the local bakery or the flower shop, small and medium-sized businesses are the heart of our local economies and the backbone of thriving, prosperous communities. It's these small business owners who create jobs, employ our neighbours, and support our charities. And I can speak to that so truthfully, Mr. Speaker, as before I got elected in 2008, I ran the United Way in Sudbury. And it was the small and medium-sized business owners that were truly coming out and supporting our charities and supporting the United Way, and so many of them across our communities. That's why, Mr. Speaker, it's so important that the government does all it can to support the growth of small businesses, and why New Democrats support common-sense solutions to reduce the paper burden and the compliance costs small businesses face when dealing with the government. New Democrats believe in reducing the paper burden and implementing solutions that have the potential to eliminate red tape for businesses. Young entrepreneurs and family businesses are key to a prosperous economic future for Canada. We need to ensure they are using their time as efficiently as possible, and the goal of reducing the paper burden for job creators is laudable. According to a report from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, various forms of regulatory requirements spread across all levels of government cost business owners an estimated $30 billion a year in time and money. This particularly concerns small and medium-sized businesses because the annual cost of regulation per employee is highest for enterprises with less than 5 employees. So I can think of all of the businesses in my riding. There are many of them as we call those businesses on Main Street that are doing great work, that they start their job at 7 o'clock in the morning and they finish at 9, 10 o'clock at night, that have 5 or less employees. But it's these businesses that lack the financial capacity to hire someone dedicated to regulatory compliance. Therefore, these costs often are internalized as lost opportunity cost because it's the small business owners themselves who are faced with the daunting task of fulfilling out the piles of paperwork that a business is obligated. With that being said, while we are happy to work with Canada's entrepreneurs to make their interaction with government as simple and cost-effective as possible, New Democrats also believe regulations that are in the public interest should be maintained. It is not just a question of managing the number of regulations on the books, but of determining which regulations are working for Canadians and which are not. Seems like common sense. Most importantly, government regulations that protect health, safety, and the environment of Canadians should be a priority. Unfortunately, this bill only pays lip service to that obligation. In fact, only in the preamble to the bill does it state that the enactment will not apply to regulations that protect the health and safety of Canadians. Even more worrisome is there is no mention of the word environment. Let me grab the bill. So in the preamble, what it states here, it says, whereas for one-for-one rule must not compromise public health, public safety, or the Canadian economy, there is absolutely no mention in this bill of the environment.
That speaks volumes.
It does. So New Democrats are not alone in expressing their concerns about this impact. And as I said, it's worrisome that there's no mention of the word in the environment. It's also reprehensible that something which New Democrats will specifically seek to address via amendment during the committee stage of the bill's proceedings. For instance, we've got some validators on this. Rob Benson, the president of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, has underscored the importance of ensuring the proper enforcement of health and safety regulations, stating that regulations and their proper enforcement can literally save lives. But sometimes only a horrific mishap will make the point. Unfortunately, we've recently had a very stark reminder of what can happen when deregulation runs amok with the tragic incident in Lake Majantic last summer. But, Mr. Speaker, the Labour movement is not alone in underscoring the importance of regulations that protect the health, safety, and environment of Canadians within the context of this bill. Here in the lead-up to the introduction of Bill C-21, Laura Jones, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, who has been quoted numerous times by the other side, stated that the rules that are necessary to protect health, promote safety, and protect the environment are important and should not be classified under the definition of red tape. Mr. Speaker, what is most concerning about this sloganistic approach to easing the paper burden on small business is that the Conservatives and the Liberal track record from the past when it comes to safeguarding regulations and standards that protect the health and safety of Canadians has been abysmal. As I mentioned earlier, the tragedy in Quebec has put rail safety in Canada back in the spotlight after decades of deregulation by the Liberals and then Conservatives, Mr. Speaker. Largely, this descent into deregulation can be traced back to 1999 when the Liberals further deregulated rail safety by continuing to implement the Safety Management Systems, SMS approach, adopted by Mulroney's Conservative government. This approach has allowed rail companies to self-regulate, rather than requiring them to adhere to operational safety standards jointly established by government and the industry. Unfortunately, here we've seen a shocking example of unchecked Democrats believe they should be exempted from the mandate of this bill, Mr. Speaker. In Canada, over 1,000 people fall victim to workplace accidents every year, while a growing number of Canadians are losing their lives or suffering from work-related illnesses. Regrettably, this number has been going up for the past 15 years, Mr. Speaker. I think we can all agree in this House that any injury, any death in the workplace is one too many. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, New Democrats need more than the government's word or the preamble of a bill that is subject to interpretation. We want assurances that the one-for-one rule will not apply to regulations that impact health, safety, and environment of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canada's entrepreneurs are resourceful and innovative by nature. They are well positioned to succeed in the 21st century economy, but to help them create the jobs we need in Canada, we need to make sure government is providing new entrepreneurs as they are forced to wait longer for answers they need to maintain and grow their business. New Democrats were staunch opponents to the cuts made by this Conservative government, cuts they have made a major impact not just on our most vulnerable citizens, but also on business owners who are placed on hold in what can seem like a never-ending queue, Mr. Speaker. While the Conservatives like to brand themselves as the party that is open for business, their cuts to the frontline public services has left a closed sign hanging in the window of government service delivery during precisely the time that small business owners need a leg up because of the economic downturn, Mr. Speaker. This has left entrepreneurs out in the cold, not to mention the impact it has had on the jobs recovery in our country. That's why this bill, Mr. Speaker, is such a misnomer. On the one hand, the government is using a sloganistic approach to improving of government. Despite dismissing a recent case against Visa and MasterCard, the Competition Tribunal, in a rare move, called for a regulatory framework to deal with anti-competitive practices. So far, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are really only paying lip service to the plight of small merchants by finally admitting that action is needed to lower merchant fees. Mr. Speaker, I could talk about the time when I went to the great riding of Winnipeg Centre, and we actually went out, myself and my colleague from that great riding, talking to small business owners in the Forks, I think is the name of that great little place that's around there. We had business owners coming around trying to track us down to talk to us about their concerns of how much they're having to spend every year. Some of them talking about in the thousands, tens of thousands of dollars just to be able to accept credit cards and credit card fees that they have to pay. Some of them have even said they've had to stop taking that, which is having an effect on their business. But they said they weren't hiring people. They're actually not expanding their business, Mr. Speaker, because all of these fees that they were having to pay. And I can talk for hours on end, Mr. Speaker. And I know you're shaking your head that I don't have hours on end. But I could, if you actually give me that time, about the issue, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of time, Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have left?
7 minutes.
Thank you very much. So unlike the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, the NDP has common sense proposals to help merchants, like creating an independent government body to crack down on the anti-competitive merchant fees that stifle small businesses. As well, Mr. Speaker, training. That is so important. We know as a party, New Democrats know that smaller businesses don't necessarily have the resources to hire a human resources manager to identify training opportunities and programs for staff, let alone expertise to apply for government training programs, Mr. Speaker. Training new employees costs time and money, and we sympathize with business owners who don't want to pony up the money to train employees only to have their competitors poach them and reap the rewards of their investment. So, Mr. Speaker, Canadian business owners really need to make the opportunity to make their workplace and have their workforce improved, because we've seen it fallen by almost 40% since 1993, Mr. Speaker. We've also called for a youth hiring training tax credit of up to about $4,000 to reward small and medium-sized enterprises who give our youth their first chances at good-paying jobs. Eligible businesses hiring Canadians aged between 18 to 25, Mr. Speaker, can get up to about $1,000 for hiring a young employee. Then another $1,000 to match funds for the training of said employee. And this tax credit would double in regions of the country where youth unemployment is highest, up to about $2,000 for each component. So there you have $4,000, Mr. Speaker. And I know in tough regions in the north, like my riding in Sudbury, we do have higher unemployment. And I've been talking to many of the small business owners in my riding, and many of them are saying something like this would be a benefit for them. We have 3 great post-secondary educations in my riding: Collège Boreal, Cambrian College, and Laurentian University, putting out great graduates, right? This would actually help them get those great paying jobs. Again, Mr. Speaker, noting that this bill, in our opinion, is sloganistic, we really need to find other programs that would work to really help small businesses, because it is the small businesses, as I mentioned earlier in the start of my speech, that are the economic drivers, right, are the heart of our economy. It's the small and medium-sized enterprises. So access to financing to help small business owners grow their business. We have a strong startup culture here in Canada, Mr. Speaker, but entrepreneurs find it hard to access the funds they need to grow their business. The Democrats hear every day from experts and business observers that Canada needs a stronger venture capital market and access to more investors to help entrepreneurs grow their innovative ventures into real successes. Unfortunately, too many promising Canadian startups are sold off to U.S. investors before they can reach full maturity, because their owners just can't access the financing to bring them to the next level. And Budget 2013 increased taxes on small business-friendly credit unions, Mr. Speaker, by over $200 million. That's money that the credit unions could be using to continue to invest in our small businesses, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives are also planning on phasing out the discounted tax treatment for Labour-sponsored venture capital funds, which provide a critical source of investments for business owners, especially in Quebec, Mr. Speaker. So if you start looking back at all of the things that we were talking about that can be done right now to help small businesses, Mr. Speaker, we haven't seen any action by this government. But what they've been doing is bringing forward this bill that's going to be talking about reducing some of the red tape and the paper burden. So again, just summarizing and in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, regulations that are in the public interest should have faith in that this Conservative government will do just that. They have a history of deregulation with no regard for the health and safety of Canadians. And as I talked about earlier, Mr. Speaker, there's just been example of that. You know, Mr. Speaker, one of the other things that I should briefly talk about that we can do right now is helping businesses plan for the next generation in retirement. And I know entrepreneurs of the baby boomer generation are approaching retirement, and many how they will dispose of the businesses they have spent a lifetime building. But New Democrats, Mr. Speaker, no entrepreneurs find it difficult to properly value the worth of a business they have poured their heart and soul into, and that finding a buyer who can raise funds to pay the right price can be challenging. The lifetime capital gains exemption protects the earnings of business owners when they sell their businesses from paying taxes on capital gains of up to $800,000, and this will often be the source of retirement funding for many business owners. Unfortunately, rules in the tax code can make it actually cost more for business owners to sell off their businesses to members of their own families, Mr. Speaker. Crazy. So talking about red tape, New Democrats think, Mr. Speaker, we should make it easier, not harder, for family business owners to pass on their businesses to their kids. So we support, Mr. Speaker, examining the tax code to make sure that businesses that are passed from one family member to another have access to the same lifetime capital gains exemption of $800,000 than any other business owner who sells their business. So talking about reducing red tape, Mr. Speaker, we also need to be ensuring that we're looking at the tax code, something that this government hasn't been talking about. I'm very pleased, Mr. Speaker, to be able to stand and speak to this. It's an issue that's very important to our party. As I mentioned, my party knows that it's small businesses and medium-sized enterprises that's the heart of our economy, that's creating the jobs. They're the job creators in this country. And if we can find ways of reducing red tape but protecting our economy, our health and safety, and the environment, I think that's what New Democrats would propose. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back. Welcome to everyone to this place. I want to thank the member opposite for his speech today. Obviously, he spent some time discussing small business with his constituents and hopefully others. I think that's a good thing. But what I question, first of all, Mr. Speaker, is whether or not he has studied the bill. This is about administrative compliance. The time, the planning, the effort it takes to demonstrate compliance with government regulation. There is nothing in the one-for-one rule or this piece of legislation that would compromise the health or safety or the environment for Canadians. It seems, Mr. Speaker, it's a curious pattern for the NDP to continue to advocate what they say that they're behind small business, but when we bring temporary hiring credits for small business, they oppose them. When we bring forward a lifetime capital gains that the member actually spoke about it, we increased it, they opposed it, and when we indexed it last year, they opposed it. So, Mr. Speaker, introducing measures like a mandatory minimum wage federally, $15, I wondered if this member has consulted with his constituents and with small business across this country, because it sounds to me that what he's running on, the bromides that he tries to pass in this place and onto others, Mr. Speaker, seems to be far divorced from reality.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question and welcome him back to Parliament as well. I find it very interesting that, I have the bill right in here. I'm talking about the preamble where there's a mention of protecting the Canadian economy, must not compromise public health, public safety, but there is no mention of the environment. So, you know what, Mr. Speaker, there is concern from a majority of Canadians. So I think when we're talking about reality, the Conservatives and my honourable colleague need to speak to Canadians about the importance that they place on the environment. And when there is nothing in here to make sure that we are going to protect the environment, that is very, very concerning, Mr. Speaker. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, he also talks about the hiring credit and the EI thing that they announced last week. Well, it was this party that took this government to task for cancelling it. So all of a sudden, They realized they canceled it, made a huge mistake, impacted small businesses, and then all of a sudden come scrambling to reintroduce something again, Mr. Speaker. It's this party that continues to talk to small businesses. It's this party that listens to small businesses and makes sure that we're talking about policies that will actually help them continue to grow, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the more I listen to this debate, I come to the conclusion that the NDP is probably the only real friend that small business has in this country, because people should be judged by what they do, not by what they say. I'm proud to say that in my province of Manitoba, we're going into our we're in our fourth majority government. The small business tax in my province, when we took over in 1999, was 11%. Every year thereafter, we lowered the small business tax by 1%, to 10, to 9, to 8, to 7, to 6, till now, the small business tax in the socialist paradise of Manitoba is 0. Now that's putting your money where your mouth is. If you really believe you want to stimulate small business, why are they hitting them with these punitive taxes? They cut taxes, corporate tax rate, religiously every chance they get to where it's way below the OECD average, but they leave the small business tax at the punitive 11%. The two things that they've announced recently, a cutback in EI premiums, is not out of their wallet. They don't put 1 cent into the EI fund. The EI fund is entirely made up by contributions from employers and employees, not 1 penny from the federal government. So when they give a few nickels of that back to small business, it's hardly coming out of their pocket. And this regulatory proposal they're making is not a cost factor either. So if they want to put their money where their mouth is, come to us with a dramatic reduction in taxes for small business, and that's something the NDP has already demonstrated we support, and we do.
I'm not sure there was a question in there, but the member from Sudbury has the opportunity to comment.
Well, I heard many questions in there, Mr. Speaker, but I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his comments, and I'm happy to respond to it. I've been able to work with my honourable colleague for the last 6 years on many files, and of course small business is one that we've always talked about, especially when it relates to the credit card file. And there are so many small businesses in the riding, in my honourable colleague's riding, that he's been very vocal with me on numerous occasions. Because they go to him, Mr. Speaker, he comes to me, and then we work on trying to find ways of helping them resolve the issue of the fees that they're having to pay. When a small business owner, and this person is a restaurant owner, and I'm not going to be specific, from my colleague's riding, comes up to me and says, I'm spending $20,000 a year on fees that I'm having to pay to credit card companies. Exactly. It's good grief, Mr. Speaker. And as that person said, they don't expand their business. They don't hire other people because they're having to pay these fees. We've brought this issue to the government numerous times. And what did they come up with, Mr. Speaker? A voluntary code of conduct that is full of loopholes. Absolutely full of loopholes. They refused to address it. The Competition Tribunal went through the whole process, punted it back to this place. They said, we need to make a decision. As parliamentarians, we need to make a decision on this. Do you know when that was, Mr. Speaker? July of 2013. We've waited over a year, and we still don't see any action. But what we see today, great, we're going to start looking at the one-for-one, and we're going to start looking at reducing red tape. We can all agree on that, Mr. Speaker. We all agree on that. But really what we need to agree on is making sure that we're not taking away regulations that are protecting Canadians in their health, in the safety, the economy, and the environment, Mr. Speaker. They continue to make cuts to the public service and say, well, now we've got a problem with small business owners because they keep calling and have to wait in line. Stop cutting the public service so we can deliver the services that businesses and Canadians need.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. Honorable député de La Salle Imar.